Follow Name Explain on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok, as well as joining my Facebook group, Friends of Name Explain, where you can chat with myself and many other name nerds. Check out the links down below. Monarchy was/is a pretty big deal around the world. Certain families deemed worthy of ruling the land for one reason or another, passing down power through their sons and daughters, as opposed to having elections to decide who is truly fit to rule a country. Of course, being this all-powerful logically means you receive a fancy title of some kind, right? There are different titles found in monarchies around the world, and in most cases, these titles are either the same or sound pretty similar, regardless if the ruling monarch is a male or female. Take the male term of emperor and its female form of empress. Likewise, we have the male sultan and the female sultana, even the male czar and the female czarina. A big shout out has to go to the ancient Egyptians, who used the title of pharaoh, regardless if their ruler was male or female. Yet in one language, the title of either the male or female monarch don't sound all that similar like these previous examples, that being the English language titles of king and queen. This is seemingly very much exclusively an English language phenomenon. The titles of king and queen sound similar in other languages, even if that country doesn't have a king or queen or use different titles for their monarchy. Take Spanish an example. Spain does have a royal family and their titles of choice are king and queen, yet in Spanish king and queen are rey and reina respectively. These are way more similar sounding than king and queen. Likewise, the Dutch monarchy used king and queen, with the Dutch translations being koning and koningin. Or take a language like Russian, which while historically used the titles of Tsar and Tsarina for their monarchy, have translations of the words king and queen which sound similar, those being Korol and Koroliva. Yeah, aforementioned titles like Tsarina and Sultan aren't actually direct translations of the words king and queen in those languages. They are different titles of different etymological origins for what are fundamentally the same roles. If king and queen, however, followed the same pattern as many other monarchy titles around the world, the titles might be something like king and kingette, or queen and queeno, or we could even just use queen for the monarch regardless of their gender. Yet obviously this isn't the case. Charles isn't known as Queeno Charles III, and his predecessor wasn't Kingette Elizabeth II. So why don't queen and king sound all that similar when their equivalents around the world do? Well, this isn't something that's seemingly been discussed all that much, meaning I don't have a concise article or paper I can just regurgitate to you all. This annoyingly meant I actually had to do some work of my own on resolving this Queenie conundrum. This means that this video is more my own theorizing on the matter using facts and thoughts I could find, as opposed to a definitive answer I'm just repeating for you all. I hope that's okay with everyone. Feel free to stop watching now if you aren't thrilled about the idea. Trust me, I wasn't happy with having to actually do some work either. Also, for ease's sake and to stop this video becoming too unwieldy and having to look into the history of every monarchy across the globe, I will be focusing on just the English/British/UK monarchy at specific points in this video to help reach a more solid conclusion in all of this. Anyway, a good place to start is with looking into the actual etymologies of the words king and queen. King is a word of seemingly inconclusive origins, which makes sense as it's a word that is super old. The leading theory is that it may derive or relate to the Old English word of king, meaning family. This is also where we get the word of kin from too, which would explain why they sound so similar. The word could have come from king, as kings would have initially been just leaders of their family/tribes, before going on to rule entire regions and nations. Queen, however, comes from a very different root. The word seems to have its origins in the Old Saxon quan, which simply means wife. This was eventually corrupted into queen and used specifically just for the wife of the king, as opposed to anyone's wife. This is interesting. If this etymology for queen is correct, we can see that the job title of queen initially simply meant to take on the role of the king's wife. And yes, queen is a job title, as is king, much like any other job title like blacksmith or doctor or YouTuber, except king and queen are job titles you can only get if you're born in the right circumstances. Understanding that queen is a job title is the path I decided to go down when trying to figure out why exactly king and queen sound so different. And for all of this to make a tad more sense, we really ought to look into job titles as a whole in English and other languages. In modern English, job titles are pretty gender neutral. A farmer, in example, is called a farmer regardless of their sex or gender, though I do need to give a quick shout out however to the word farmerette, kingette, which I found on the website of the Merriam-Webster Dictionary, which is an early 20th century term for a female farmer. It's clearly not used all that much anymore. There are, however, examples of gender-specific job titles in English, things like actress and actor, waitress and waiter, and even firewoman and fireman. I have a couple theories as to why these exist, which I'll explain towards the end of this video, but many of them have gender-neutral terms anyway these days, like firefighter instead of fireman or woman. Why does English have such gender-neutral job titles? Well, this can be explained by understanding the grammar of English, as well as the historic culture of England/Britain, where the English language originated from. Modern English does not have a grammatical gender like many other languages. Grammatical gender is when a word changes its spelling based on the gender of the person it is relating to. It's seen in languages like French and Spanish. More on grammatical gender in a bit. What this means is that in English, it isn't really a done thing naturally to add a specific suffix to the end of a word to denote if it's relating to a man or woman, which can partially explain to us why we don't have terms like kingette or queeno. Though, as mentioned, there is more than just grammar at play in all this, I feel. The culture around professions played a role in this too. In Britain's past, these job titles didn't really need to be gender specific, not because people were allowed to do whatever job they wanted in the past regardless of their gender. It was in fact quite the opposite. Most jobs were expected to only be worked by one gender, so there really wasn't a need for separate male and female job titles for these roles. In example, farmers would almost always be men, so there wasn't really a need to make a female term. And likewise, nurses would have almost always been women, so there wasn't really a need for a male-specific term for nurses either. What this could all possibly mean is that most job titles would already be deeply linked with a specific gender. It was just the norm that a farmer would be a man and a nurse would be a woman. It was only way later down the line that it became more acceptable for people of one gender to work a job linked with another gender. And by the time this happened, people just stuck with the titles already being used. Though even to this day, there can still be stigma seen around people working jobs not traditionally linked with their gender. This brings us back to the job titles this video is all about, king and queen. While now widely seen as gender-specific job titles for the exact same role, in the past these were two completely different job roles, so required different job titles, and each of those job roles were linked with different genders. The job title of king, whose role it was to run the country, was linked with men, and the job title of queen, whose role it was, as we see in its etymology, was to simply be the king's wife, was linked with just women. This could lead us to believe that queen as a job title was never really intended to mean someone who is actually in charge. It was concocted initially to simply be the job title for the person that is married to the person in charge. This initial meaning of the title queen makes it pretty similar to the modern title of first lady and first gentleman, the title given to the wife or husband of a president. This is a title specifically for the person married to the person in power, and doesn't sound similar to president. It's not like the first lady of the USA has ever been known as the presidentess or anything like that. King and queen may not sound similar because initially these were two completely different job roles, so required two completely different titles. Yet this isn't the case anymore. There have been many women who have taken on the job title of queen and had the role of being in charge, as opposed to just being the wife of the king. How did the title transition from just meaning the king's wife to meaning the ruling female monarch? This is where it's easy to focus on just the UK, otherwise we'd have to look into the history of every monarchy on the globe as mentioned, and we don't quite have time for that. Cool? Cool. Well, in the case of the UK/Britain/England, it kind of happened simply because the nation was left with no choice but to have a female ruling monarch. I'm sure we all know that how you become monarch is by having your parent be the monarch and then they die. Traditionally, however, the rule was that it always went to the eldest son. This meant that a king could have 6 kids, the first 5 being daughters and the youngest a son. When the king died, the son would be the one to become king, surpassing his 5 older sisters. This was only changed in the UK in 2023, when it was decided the firstborn child of the monarch would become monarch next, regardless of their gender. Prior to this, England really went out its way to make sure that a woman wouldn't be the heir to the throne, and that there would always be a son somewhere to be next in line. We all know about Henry VIII and his 6 wives. This meant that it took a seriously long time for there to be a ruling queen in the land. There are disputed ruling queens going back as far as the 12th century in England, but the first undisputed ruling queen of England was Mary I, who became queen in 1553. Prior to this, the title of queen in England was reserved solely for the wife of the king and not used by a woman who was the bloodline monarch of the land. This was the first time that England was in the position to have a female monarch, so it happened. As the title of queen was so linked with female royalty already, it was seemingly just used for ease's sake. They couldn't be called kings too because by this point, king was already deeply linked with male rulers, and they couldn't coin a term like kingette because the English language didn't really do the whole gendered grammar thing. Since Mary I, however, the UK has had a handful of other queens, from Mary's sister Elizabeth I to Victoria to Elizabeth II, who had the longest ever reign as a British monarch. So the conclusion I came to as to why king and queen don't sound similar is because English doesn't have gendered grammar, and in the past, king and queen were two different job roles, so required different titles. While that explains the question in this video's title, what about the other side of this coin? Why do gendered monarch names sound so similar in other languages, like Tsar and Tsarina? Well, this goes back to the whole gendered grammar thing, as mentioned earlier. Most other languages have gendered grammar, which means words are changed depending on who is being talked about. This is the case for job titles too. So in a language like Russian, instead of just creating a whole new word for the wife of the Tsar, it was just more natural for the language to use the title of Tsar and add a feminine suffix to it and make it Tsarina. Same for other gendered languages that have kings and queens too, like the Spanish titles of Rey and Reina. This goes way beyond the monarchy, however. In gendered languages, most job titles change depending on the person with the job, even to this day. For example, if you are a male doctor, in Spanish you are called a doctor, but if you are a female doctor in Spanish you are called a doctora. While that's a Spanish example, a different gendered language could explain why English does have some gendered job titles, like waitress and waiter. I did promise I'd come back to these. French had a huge influence on the language thanks to the Norman invasion of 1066, and these could be a byproduct of that. Conversely, they could have been created once it became more normal for people of one gender to do a job role that was traditionally linked with another gender. People might have thought that because women were now farmers and men were now nurses, they needed a new title too. I refer you back to that bizarre term of farmerette. But that's just my own theory on the matter. And I need to stress that most of this video has been my own hypothesis based on facts and ideas. Feel free to let me know if you think I'm wrong down in the comments and why you think that. Even tell me your ideas, I'd love to hear them. For my next video, however, I'm just going to be lazy and find something someone has already written about and just copy them. This video topic was suggested by Steven Nikolov over on my Patreon. Every Wednesday, I put up a video request post over on my Patreon for my awesome patrons to leave video ideas on. I then pick one of those ideas to be turned into a video the following Wednesday. So if you have a great idea for a Name Explain video and wish to enjoy Name Explain videos ad-free, as well as get exclusive content and your name at the end of these videos, then why not support the channel on Patreon? It takes just $1 a month to help the channel in a huge way and gets you all of these amazing benefits. Visit patreon.com/nameexplain or click the link down below. Name Explain depends on viewers like yourself supporting the channel financially on Patreon, so a huge thank you to everyone who does. Donating just $1 a month helps the channel amazingly and gets you bonuses including ad-free videos, exclusive content, the power to request ideas to be made into actual Name Explain videos, and your name at the end of the video with all these awesome people. Visit patreon.com/nameexplain or click the link down below to find out how you too can support the channel. Thank you. Thanks for reaching the end of the video. Why not watch another and subscribe to keep up to date on all things Name Explain. You can find myself on Instagram where I'm NameExplainYT and join the Facebook group Friends of Name Explain to talk with myself and other name nerds. All that will be linked down below. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video and once again, thank you all so much.